September 1991. Rosa Hernandez, 43 years old, had been working as a housekeeper for Pablo Escobar for 6 years. She cleaned his safe houses, cooked his meals, did his laundry, and asked no questions about the armed men who came and went, the stacks of cash she sometimes found in closets, or the blood she occasionally had to clean from floors and walls. Rosa needed the job. Pablo paid well, better than any legitimate employer in Medellin. And as long as she kept her mouth shut and her eyes down, she was safe. That's what she told herself. That's what she believed. Until the day she was cleaning Pablo's bedroom in one of his safe houses and found a metal box hidden under the bed. A box she wasn't supposed to see. A box that would force her to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. Die or disappear for 30 years. Rosa had started working for Pablo in 1985 when she was 37 years old and desperate for money. Her husband Carlos had been injured in a construction accident and couldn't work. They had 3 children to feed. Rosa had been cleaning houses for wealthy families in Medellin, but the pay was barely enough to survive. And then one of Pablo's people approached her with an offer. Work as a housekeeper for one of Pablo's properties. The pay would be triple what she was making. All she had to do was clean, cook, and never talk about what she saw. Rosa said yes. And for 6 years, she'd kept that promise. She cleaned safe houses where Pablo met with his associates. Had cooked meals for sicarios who'd just come back from killing people. Had washed blood out of clothes and scrubbed bullet holes out of walls. She'd seen things that would have gotten most people killed just for witnessing them. But Rosa had survived by being invisible, by doing her job and pretending she saw nothing, heard nothing, knew nothing. But on September 12, 1991, while cleaning Pablo's bedroom in a safe house in the hills outside Medellin, Rosa's invisibility failed her. She was vacuuming under the bed, something she did every week when the vacuum caught on something. She got down on her hands and knees to see what was blocking it, and there, pushed far back against the wall, was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, locked with a combination lock. Rosa should have left it alone, should have pushed it back under the bed and pretended she'd never seen it. But she was curious. 6 years of working for Pablo, 6 years of seeing hints of his secrets, and she'd never actually found anything concrete, never actually seen evidence of what Pablo did. This box was different. This box was hidden. This box was locked. This box contained something Pablo didn't want anyone to see. Rosa looked around. She was alone in the house. Pablo wasn't due back for hours. The bodyguards were outside. Nobody was watching. She picked up the box, shook it gently, heard papers rustling inside, tried the lock. It was a simple combination lock. 3 numbers. Rosa tried a few random combinations. Nothing. Then she tried Pablo's birthday, December 1st, 1949. December 1st, 49. The lock clicked open. Rosa opened the box. Inside were photographs, documents, and a handwritten list. The photographs showed people, men and women, some Rosa recognized from the news, some she didn't. The documents were official-looking papers with government seal. And the list was a single page, handwritten in Pablo's distinctive script, with 50 names numbered from 1 to 50. Rosa started reading the name. Most she didn't recognize. But then she saw number 37, Carlos Hernandez. Her husband's name. Her husband, who'd been injured in a construction accident in 1985. Her husband, who'd been working on a government building when scaffolding had collapsed and crushed his legs. Her husband, who told her it was an accident, just bad luck, just one of those things that happens on construction sites. But seeing his name on this list, in this box, in Pablo Escobar's bedroom, Rosa suddenly understood. It hadn't been an accident. Pablo had ordered it, had targeted her husband specifically, had arranged for the scaffolding to collapse. And Rosa didn't know why, didn't know what Carlos had done to deserve it, but she knew with absolute certainty that Pablo had destroyed her husband's life deliberately. She kept reading, looked at the other name, looked at the photographs, and slowly, terribly, she started to understand what this box contained. It was a record of people Pablo had hurt, not killed. There were other lists for that, Rosa assumed, but hurt, injured, destroyed in ways that looked like accidents or bad luck, but were actually carefully orchestrated acts of revenge or intimidation or warning. The photographs showed the aftermath. A man in a hospital bed with burns covering his body. A woman in a wheelchair, paralyzed. A child with scars on their face. And next to each photograph, a note in Pablo's handwriting explaining what had been done and why. Talked to police. House fire. Testified against associate. Car accident. Refused bribe. Acid attack on daughter. Rosa felt sick. She'd known Pablo was violent. Had known he killed people. But this was different. This was systematic. This was Pablo keeping trophies of the people he destroyed. Keeping records of their suffering. And her husband was one of them. Number 37 on a list of 50 people whose lives Pablo had ruined. Rosa heard a car door slam outside. Panic flooded through her. Someone was here. She shoved the papers and photographs back in a box, closed the lid, tried to lock it. But her hands were shaking. She couldn't get the combination right. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Someone was coming. She finally got the lock closed, shoved the box back under the bed, stood up, grabbed the vacuum cleaner, and tried to look like she'd been cleaning the whole time. Pablo walked into the bedroom, looked at Rosa, looked at the vacuum cleaner, looked at the bed, and Rosa saw his eyes narrow, saw him notice something. Maybe the box wasn't pushed back far enough. Maybe Rosa's hands were shaking too obviously. Maybe her face showed too much fear. But Pablo knew. Somehow he knew. Rosa, Pablo said quietly. What were you doing? Cleaning, senor, Rosa said, trying to keep her voice steady. Just vacuuming under the bed. Pablo walked over to the bed, got down on his knees, reached under, pulled out the box, looked at the lock, looked at Rosa. This lock was open when I left this morning. Now it's closed. Did you open this box, Rosa? Rosa could have lied, could have said no, could have insisted she'd never touched it, could have tried to convince Pablo that the lock had been closed all along. But she knew Pablo would see through the lie, knew he'd check the box, see that the papers had been moved, see that someone had been looking through. And lying to Pablo Escobar was more dangerous than telling the truth. Yes, Rosa whispered. I opened it. I'm sorry. I was curious. I didn't mean to. What did you see? Rosa's mind raced. She could tell him she'd only glanced inside, hadn't really looked, hadn't understood what she was seeing. But Pablo was staring at her with those cold, calculating eyes. And Rosa knew he'd know if she was minimizing, knew he'd assume the worst. So she told him the truth. I saw the list. The photographs. The notes. I saw my husband's name. Pablo was silent for a long moment. Then he set the box on the bed, sat down next to it, looked at Rosa with an expression she couldn't read. Your husband was number 37. Do you know why? Rosa shook her head. He was working on a government building, a courthouse. He overheard a conversation between two judges about a case against one of my associates. He went to the police, told them what he'd heard. The police used that information to convict my associate. Your husband's testimony, indirect, secondhand, but still his testimony, put one of my people in prison for 15 years. So I had his scaffolding sabotaged, made sure he'd never work construction again, made sure he'd never be able to testify about anything again, made sure he'd spend the rest of his life in pain, remembering what happens when you talk to the police about Pablo Escobar. Rosa felt tears running down her face. Her husband had never told her, had never said anything about overhearing judges, about going to the police, about testifying. He just told her it was an accident, had lived with the pain and the disability and the guilt for 6 years without ever explaining why it had really happened. He didn't know, Rosa said. He didn't know it was you. He thought it was just an accident. Good, Pablo said. That's how it's supposed to work. The best revenge is the kind where the victim never knows they're being punished. They just think they're unlucky. They blame God or fate or bad luck. They never blame me. That's the art of it. Rosa didn't know what to say, didn't know how to process what she was hearing. Pablo was talking about destroying her husband's life like it was a business decision, like it was strategy, like it was something to be proud of. You weren't supposed to see this, Pablo continued. This box is private, personal. It's not for anyone else. It's just for me. A reminder of the people who crossed me and paid for it. A reminder that I don't forget. I don't forgive. I just wait, and then I destroy them in ways they never see coming. I won't tell anyone, Rosa said desperately. I swear. I'll forget I ever saw it. I'll never mention it. Please, senor. I have children. I need this job. I won't. Pablo held up a hand. Rosa, stop. We both know you can't forget this. You've seen your husband's name. You know what I did to him. You know about the others. You know about the box. That knowledge is dangerous. For you and for me. Rosa felt her legs go weak. She knew what was coming. Pablo was going to kill her. Was going to have one of his sicarios take her somewhere and put a bullet in her head. Was going to make her disappear. She thought about her children. About Carlos. About how they'd never know what happened to her. But Pablo surprised her. I'm going to give you a choice, Rosa. A choice I don't usually give people. You can die. Quick. Painless. Tonight. Your family will think it was an accident. They'll grieve and move on. That's option one. Or you can disappear. Leave Colombia. Leave your family. Start a new life somewhere else with a new name. Never contact your husband or children again. Live the rest of your life knowing they think you abandoned them. That's option two. You have 60 seconds to decide. Rosa stared at him. You're asking me to choose between dying and abandoning my family. Yes. Because if you stay, if you keep working here, if you keep living your normal life, you'll always know what I did to your husband. You'll always have that knowledge. And eventually, you'll tell someone. You'll confess to a priest, or tell a friend, or write it in a diary. And that information will get out. And I'll have to kill you and everyone you told. So you can't stay. You either die now, or you leave and never come back. Those are your options. What about my family? What will you tell them? If you choose to disappear, I'll tell them you ran off with another man. I'll make it believable. I'll plant evidence. They'll hate you for abandoning them, but they'll be alive. If you choose to die, I'll make it look like a robbery. They'll mourn you, but they'll be alive. Either way, they survive. The only question is whether you survive. Rosa thought about her children, thought about Carlos, thought about never seeing them again, never holding them, never explaining why she left, thought about them hating her, thinking she'd abandoned them for another man. It was unbearable, but it was better than being dead, better than leaving them with no mother at all. I'll disappear, Rosa said. Pablo nodded. Smart choice. You have 2 hours to pack a bag. Take only what you can carry. No photographs. No letters. Nothing that connects you to your old life. My people will drive you to the airport. You'll fly to Panama. From there, you'll go wherever you want. I'll give you $50,000 to start your new life. That's generous. That's more than most people get. But you have to promise me something. What? You never come back to Colombia. You never contact your family. You never tell anyone this story. If I hear that you've broken that promise, if I hear that you've told anyone about the box or the list or what I did to your husband, I'll kill your entire family. Your husband, your children, your parents, everyone. Do you understand? Rosa understood. She was being given a chance to live, but only if she gave up everything that made her life worth living. Only if she became a ghost. Only if she erased herself from her family's lives completely. 2 hours later, Rosa was on a plane to Panama with a fake passport, $50,000 in cash, and a new name, Maria Santos. She never saw her husband or children again, never called them, never wrote to them, lived for 30 years in Panama City, working as a housekeeper for wealthy families, living alone in a small apartment, carrying the weight of what she knew and what she'd lost. Her family in Medellin believed Pablo's story, believed that Rosa had run off with another man. Carlos was devastated. The children were angry, confused, hurt. They grew up thinking their mother had abandoned them, grew up hating her for leaving, never knew the truth. And Rosa lived with that knowledge every day, lived with knowing that her children thought she was a terrible person, lived with knowing that Carlos thought she betrayed him, lived with the guilt and the loneliness and the secrets she could never tell. Until 2021, 30 years after she disappeared. Pablo Escobar had been dead for 28 years. Most of his associates were dead or in prison. The Medellin cartel was history. And Rosa, now 73 years old, decided she was tired of hiding, tired of carrying the secret alone, tired of letting her children think she'd abandoned them. She contacted a Colombian journalist, told him her story, told him about the box, about the list, about what Pablo had done to her husband, told him about the choice Pablo had given her, told him everything. And the journalist published it. The story made international news. Pablo Escobar's housekeeper emerges after 30 years, reveals secret list of victims. Rosa's children, now adults in their 40s and 50s, saw the story, saw their mother's face in the photograph, saw her real name, learned the truth about why she disappeared. They contacted her, flew to Panama to meet her, and Rosa, after 30 years of silence, finally got to explain, finally got to tell them that she hadn't abandoned them, that she'd been forced to choose between dying and disappearing, that she'd chosen to disappear so they could live, that she'd thought about them every single day for 30 years. Her children didn't know how to feel. They were angry that she'd kept the secret for so long, angry that she'd let them think she'd abandoned them. But they also understood that she'd been trapped, understood that Pablo had given her an impossible choice, understood that she'd done what she thought was best. Carlos, Rosa's husband, had died in 2015. He'd never known the truth, had died thinking his wife had left him for another man. Rosa would have to live with that, would have to live with knowing that Carlos had spent the last 24 years of his life believing a lie. But at least her children knew now. At least they understood. At least Rosa could spend whatever time she had left with them, could try to rebuild some kind of relationship, could try to make up for the 30 years she'd lost. In an interview after the reunion, one of Rosa's daughters said, "I spent my whole life hating my mother, thinking she was selfish, thinking she'd abandoned us for no reason. And now I know the truth. I know she left to protect us. I know she lived in exile for 30 years, alone, carrying this terrible secret, so that we could be safe. I don't know if I can forgive her for not telling us sooner, but I understand why she did what she did. And I'm grateful she's alive. I'm grateful we get to know her now, even if it's 30 years late." The box that Rosa had found was never recovered. Pablo had presumably destroyed it after Rosa disappeared, knowing that it was too dangerous to. But Rosa's testimony about what was in the box led to new investigations into some of the accidents on the list. Some of the cases were reopened. Some of the victims, or their families, finally got answers about what had really happened to them. And Rosa's story became one of the most haunting tales to emerge from the Pablo Escobar era. Not because of the violence, though the list of 50 people Pablo had systematically destroyed was horrifying, but because of the choice. Because of the impossible decision Pablo had forced Rosa to make. Because of the 30 years she'd spent in exile, alone, carrying a secret that destroyed her family, even as it kept them alive. People who heard the story asked, what would you do? If you were given that choice, die or disappear, which would you choose? There's no good answer. Both options are terrible. Both options involve loss and pain and sacrifice. That's what made Pablo Escobar so terrifying. Not just that he killed people, but that he gave people choices where every option led to suffering, where survival meant losing everything that made life worth living. Rosa Hernandez lived until 2023, dying at the age of 75 in Panama City, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her obituary mentioned that she'd been a housekeeper, a mother, and a survivor of the Medellin cartel era. It didn't mention the 30 years she'd spent in exile, didn't mention the box, didn't mention the impossible choice. Those details were in the news articles, in the interviews, in the documentary that was made about her life. But what people remembered most was the reunion. The moment when Rosa's children had flown to Panama and met their mother for the first time in 30 years. The moment when Rosa had finally been able to explain. The moment when a family that had been broken by Pablo Escobar's cruelty had finally been able to start healing. That moment, captured in photographs and video, became the lasting image of Rosa's story. Not the fear, not the exile, not the loneliness, but the reunion, the forgiveness, the understanding, the proof that even after 30 years, even after all the pain and loss and suffering, love could survive, family could survive, hope could survive. And that, perhaps, was the real lesson of Rosa Hernandez's story. Not that Pablo Escobar was a monster, everyone already knew that, but that his victims, the people he tried to destroy, could find ways to survive, could find ways to rebuild, could find ways to come back from the impossible choices he'd forced them to make. Rosa had disappeared for 30 years, but she'd come back. And in coming back, she'd proven that Pablo Escobar, for all his power and all his cruelty, hadn't won, hadn't destroyed her completely, hadn't taken everything from her. She'd survived, and that was enough.